Now, while Britain's convulsed with its general election in Rome, the preliminary positions are being staked out in the election which begins on Monday to choose a new pope. The Irish bookmaker Paddy Power already has one man the clear 3-1 favourite. He's the Nigerian Francis Cardinal Arinze. He once described the family as desecrated by adultery, mocked by homosexuality, sabotaged by irregular unions. But if elected, he would also be the first African pope. What difference would that make to the church? Paul Mason has been in Nigeria to discover more.
What started as a quiet vigil to pray for the life of John Paul II ended up as an impromptu requiem mass. As news of the Pope's death comes through, the Archbishop of Abuja arrives to lead the mourning.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God.
Nigeria's power supply respects neither status nor occasion. In Africa's most resource-rich country, power cuts are common. But the church has generators of its own. As with so much on this continent, it provides what the state cannot. As thoughts turn to the election of a new pope, people here are letting themselves dare to believe he could be one of their own. The man they're pinning their hopes on is already number 4 in the Vatican hierarchy. He is Francis Cardinal Arinze, prefect of the Congregation for Divine Worship. He doesn't give many interviews, but he does like making speeches.
Religion teaches people that despite differences of race and culture, the human family is one. Hence, there arise norms of right and wrong in the relations between human beings.
Arinze was born here at Eziowelle, a village in southeast Nigeria, in 1932. His parents were farmers. They sent their sons to the local school, run by Irish priests. His brother still lives here.
How he behaves, very quiet, sympathetic, paying heed to people's need. People in difficulty, he listens to that and helps to solve the problem, if he could do it. Yes. And then being so studious, so busy with his studies, he doesn't want to play, except the time for playing.
The religion his parents followed was one of sacrifice and ancestor worship. Born an animist, he was baptized into the Catholic Church aged 9 and decided there and then to be a priest.
When he was consecrated Archbishop,
Right.
then he came home and took this picture with my father and my mother.
The same determination took him to the top of the Nigerian church and into the heart of the Vatican, where he's been for the last 20 years.
It was while Francis Cardinal was studying in Rome that he sent people to come and talk to my father and my mother. After 2-3 years, they were converted, they were baptized, and they became Christians.
What has it meant to villages like this, the arrival of Christianity?
As of now, I must assure you, whether I don't think I can trace any house in the town that is not a Christian house.
Really?
Yes.
So traditional religion is more or less gone?
Actually.
Bigard Memorial Seminary in the nearby city of Enugu is one of the largest in Africa. Arinze was the 83rd boy to enroll, and he's remembered as a star pupil. And you've got here Cardinal Arinze's school record.
Oh, yeah.
What does it tell us about him?
It tells us his marks in philosophy. It was what we can, in our record here, we have it as very, very above average student, high record. In those days it would be, and in this time it would be summa cum laude marks.
After being ordained in Rome, he returned here in the late 50s to find the church struggling to be relevant to a continent on the brink of change. The colonial powers were retreating, and, as the list of college rectors shows, so were the missionaries they'd brought with them.
The church is much more African now than when Francis Cardinal Arinze studied here. Those days, Mass was done completely in Latin. The readings were in Latin. But nowadays, we have almost everything in our vernacular. The music, the Word of God is read and proclaimed in our native language.
The watershed for African Catholicism came in the 60s with the Second Vatican Council. The aim was to modernize the church. In most places, that meant a more liberal attitude to social issues and less emphasis on holy water, shrines, and the Latin Mass. But Vatican II also gave church leaderships at national level more room to go their own way. It was the start of the Africanization process. But the way men like Arinze chose has made Africa a bastion of conservatism within the church. In Nigeria, the church has refused to go down the route of radical activism and liberation theology popular in Latin America, and for this, backing came straight from the top.
There are differences between the way we see issues that you could say look alike, namely issues of injustice and the need to change the system in order to improve the social and political climate of a nation. The same issue we have in Africa. But in Africa, we handle it in a different way. Now, the church in Africa has decided to go about this mainly pursuing the Catholic social doctrines. And luckily, we must say, here Pope John Paul II comes in. He understood us.
And they understood him. In Abuja's half-finished cathedral, thousands gather for a service to celebrate the life of Pope John Paul II. 2/3 of Catholics live in the developing world, 120 million in Africa alone, and the churches are usually overflowing. Catholicism here needs as much of the old mystique as it can muster. It's losing people to the Pentecostal churches, which are noisier and promise instant miracles. At heart, this is the same ritual the Irish and the Italians brought here, tweaked in an African direction. So as well as grassroots support, Arinze will have strong allies among the conservatives who control the Vatican. There's a rising expectation here that the next pope could be African. Cardinal Arinze would represent continuity with the social conservatism of Pope John Paul II. He'd be a powerful symbol of the changing centre of gravity of the church from the rich north to the poor south. But above all, Arinze and the Nigerian church stand on the front line of the confrontation that could shape the next papacy, that between Christianity and Islam. In the year 2000, the northern city of Kaduna was torn apart by religious riots. The local government had voted to introduce Sharia law. Christians protested, 3,000 people died. Since then, hundreds more have been killed.
Nigeria is the only country in the world where you have at least claims of a 50-50 percentage between Christians and Muslims. And the tension between Christians and Muslims is not helped by the fact that, the Christianity has witnessed phenomenal growth in Nigeria. I mean, in many parts of Nigeria, Islam predates Christianity by like 700-800 years. So Christianity is far more ubiquitous in Nigeria than Islam. That has also led to a lot of Muslims feeling that Christianity has more or less taken the battle to our doorsteps, so to say.
Kaduna today is thriving but still tense. Local Muslim leaders, rattled by the political reform process, are threatening to call a jihad unless they get a bigger say. There's great mistrust and protest marches are banned.
And historically, Catholics were a minority and were discriminated against. So in Ireland, there is a peace process.
These are the men who are holding the peace together. Imams, priests and preachers, they signed a peace deal in 2002. And here, they're being taught about the lessons of another troubled peace. As they sit down to lunch, together but separate, they're all aware of the pressure they're under from their own communities.
The dreadful passion, the fury that go with the passion of religion is more dreadful than atomic and nuclear bomb. The easier the world community realizes this, the better and safer the world becomes.
What can be done?
What will be done is the Pope has made a solution. When he visited Nigeria, he said there will be no peace in the world where there is no social justice. I feel he spoke the minds of men of religion.
Cardinal Arinze spent years running the Vatican's Interfaith Council, leading the dialogue with the Muslim world. But in the crucial years of conflict, he never visited Nigeria's war-torn north. Travelling from the north to Lagos in the southwest, you trace the route African poverty has taken in the last 20 years. From the village to the city. 13 million people live here. The vast majority are poor. 4 million crowd into Amakoko, a classic slum. There is no street map of this place. Here, they sleep 10 or 12 to a room. Poverty and ignorance are the biggest killers. It's an old wives' tale, but many of these women believe that breast milk can go bad and harm the baby. Some have stopped breastfeeding. At this clinic, they're being taught the facts and a recipe for homemade baby food. It's a one-stop shop for medicine, jabs, advice and TLC.
Sorry, you're my friend now. Sorry.
St. Matthew's Clinic is run by the Catholic Church in the shape of the Medical Missionaries of Mary. This is the only specialist clinic in the district. Here they deal with all the killer diseases: TB, malaria, typhoid, malnutrition and HIV. About 20% of the people tested here are HIV positive. But while the sisters will organise antiretroviral drugs, they will not give out condoms. It's a stance rooted in the teachings of the last Pope, a stance Cardinal Arinze has supported.
We preach more of abstinence, especially among the youth, and that's the only preventive measure, because even condom cannot give you 100%, maybe 90-something, but who will be the next 1% or 2%? And each person is very important, and because of that, we said it's better to look for the best, which is 100%, and that is abstinence.
A policy that's at odds with the strategy of the Nigerian government. But for acute patients like Tawa, the clinic is all that stands between life and death. In Amakoko, the community is mixed. Tawa's a Muslim, but the sisters treat all comers. The Nigerian government barely exists in these streets. Africa is high on the global agenda. World leaders are faced with crucial decisions on debt reduction, trade and aid. An African Pope would have a powerful voice in the debate. It's been 20 years since Francis Arinze left Africa, and now it's a different continent. It's been pushed backwards by AIDS, ethnic conflict and the impact of global trade. But mobile phones and satellite TV mean people here have a very clear idea of what they're missing out on. In Europe, electing an African Pope might seem like a radical gesture. To many here, it seems like the minimum that could be done. As the cardinals meet in Rome, on this continent, people of every creed will hold their breath